Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, I guess kind of starting back in the early days, I had no idea that testing or NETA testing, any of this even went on. So I was a young guy, had some college classes with a dude, and we were sharing notes. And his dad owned this company, so when I got laid off, he was like, "Well, hey, come work for us for a little while." And and my wife's in HR. She'll find you a job out. We've got a little government reserve here. I guess I don't know. They call it Redstone Arsenal, and so everybody around here wants to work at Redstone Arsenal. That's where the big bucks were made, right? And so he's like, yeah, she'll get you a job out there doing IT or whatever it is you want to do. And so I went on board with them, and they were a testing company, but they kind of dabbled in a lot of manual stuff. And so we were moving some transformers out of a substation, middle of middle of June, hot days, jacking up transformers, building railroad tracks underneath them, winching them out with a truck so that we could we kept the substation live. So the lines above us were hot, and so we're working under like 69 kV lines, moving these transformers. So we had plenty. It's plenty safe, but we couldn't use a crane, so we did everything manually. And I was like, well, I'm young. I'm 18 years old. I can work hard. And it was kind of fun. And we finished that project up. Took us about a month. And so then I was like, well, hey, what's the deal here? Do I need to keep looking for a job, or do I, you know, do I stay here? I just kept showing up for work every day, and finally they're like, "Oh yeah, you've got health insurance, and everything's good. You're full time." And I was like, "Well, crap. Okay, that's nice, man. Good deal." But so I just kept showing up for work, and had the privilege of working under some great guys that had a lot of knowledge. One of the dudes is an AVO training staff now, and he's been out there for probably 15, 20 years
Wow.
training at AVO. And so we tested I watched him test a bunch of electromechanical relays, and I just sat there and kind of, old SR-76 relay test set, dials and knobs and switches, and kind of, oh, wow, what is this thing? It's like something out of a 60s film or something. I get, it was built in 1976 with outdated technology. I'll put it that way. But I think they just took the SR-51, which was built in 1951, and repackaged it and put it back out on the market. Wooden boxes, we're talking about some antiquated crap, but it worked. And we were testing a ton of electromechanical relays. There's still electromechanical relays dispersed throughout the Tennessee Valley system that we're in down here. A lot of these small towns had bought these substations or had been given these substations from TVA. So there was a lot of opportunity to help them maintain them. They didn't have the depth of field or knowledge to do that. And so we went all across Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee to these little municipal. A lot of times, maybe they only had one or two substations to feed the whole town,
Wow.
and so they didn't have trained technicians. They had linemen that were great guys, but they just didn't have the knowledge to work really inside the fence that much. And so it was a different world kind of back then. I mean, I'd say back then it was kind of the end. I came in kind of the end of the era. Linemen today are incredibly knowledgeable. They know all kinds of, they're dealing with reclosers out on the line, and so it's kind of a total different world from today as it was back then. But so that's how I got into this niche that I didn't know even existed. Had lived 18 years of my life and thought I knew what I wanted to do, and this was not even on my radar. I see that a lot, now that there's a lot of stuff that if you're thinking about what you want to do later in life, if you're young, there's a lot of things that you probably end up doing that you didn't even know were possible. But kind of moved up, carried tools, learned, um, took my level 2, passed that, took my level 3 a couple years later, passed that, kind of just kept building on my career, and eventually was kind of running a small NETA company, NETA firm, and we were I was the salesman, I was the ops manager, I was the planner, I was the scheduler, and some days I did the other end of it too, and um, that's kind of how I got started and where I kind of fell into this from.
Well, what did you think? So you mentioned taking your NETA 2 and NETA 3. Did you get your NETA 4 as well?
Not at that time. I just recently got my NETA 4. You know, the company then I worked for a company for 10 years, and they didn't really incentivize the NETA levels, and so then once I started my own company, I had to take the NETA exams all over again. So I took the level in 2 and 3 back to back one day, and then I was like, I'm done with all this testing. Give me
Right. That's pretty heavy.
but
Get it done
it's
on the same day.
it's interesting that we had a prime power guy that came to work, and he had never gotten his level 4 because everywhere he worked, if you got your level 4, they put you behind a desk. And
Gotcha.
I was like, well, man, don't let that stop you from getting it. I said, I'll let you work in the field as long as you want to. He wanted to touch the stuff. He was afraid, and it was true that some
It
NETA
is.
companies, if you get your level 4, there's a demand for them to sit and kind of be project managers, and it's not what he wanted to do. And so then he turned around and challenged me. Well, I'll get mine if you'll sit and do it with me. And so I was like, okay, um, kind of, I don't know, we may be ahead of myself here, but like, we went and took that test, and that dude, he had been studying and stuff, and I mean, I'm running a company, I don't have a ton of time, but I had
Right.
bounced some stuff off of him, and we had kind of bickered back and forth with questions and old tech quizzes and stuff like that, trying to make sure that we're at least, there's so much of it that even if you know it really well, which I would say I know things fairly well after 25 years in the industry, um, there's just a lot of it you don't touch for a couple of years at a time, and so you need to kind of refresh yourself on that. And so we went in, and I'm sitting there. They got him started first. He started probably 5 minutes before me, but I've been working for like maybe 25, 30 minutes, and this dude's done. He like gets up and walks out, and I'm like, oh man, he messed up. Oh, I feel so bad because
Right.
and so I'm sitting there for another 20 or 30 minutes trying to like go through. It's 100 questions,
Right.
and so even if you only spend a couple minutes on each one, that's two. You only have 3 hours to complete it. So I don't know. It probably took me a little over an hour to go through everything and feel comfortable with it and do some. Some of them you're doing math equations and
Right.
working out formulas and stuff, and um, some of them are just real off the cuff. I know that one. Boom, 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 and then you got some that are like, I don't know. There's nothing in my knowledge base that I can go back to. It's not like I've forgotten this. I have never known this. Um, and so I'm just gonna, but NETA definitely is one of those tests that you can't just go and click C on all of them
Right.
and beat it. So I got done, and I was like, man, how'd it go? Are you okay? And he was like, oh yeah, I passed. And I was like, crap, here I've got this near genius level guy on my staff. He goes through I
Right.
bet he could not have spent more than like 8 to 12 seconds on each question.
Just
I'm like, how do
cruising.
you do that? Anyhow,
Well, I've seen it too, man. And doing some of these, just interviews and just talking to NETA folks, like it's a different caliber of smart. Some of these folks are just mind blowingly smart.
mm,
I mean, I'm not by far from the dumbest person I know, or at least, if I am, I don't know. But no, just the sheer ability to comprehend some of the stuff like the, TTR testing and the different phases and how to qualify all that stuff. And, operating the various relay test sets. I just did an interview with a couple of prime power bubbas, and they're talking about, I think it was like the SMRTs and the MPRTs and all that other good stuff that come with it. And understanding that, like, even down to, and I didn't know this, like the relay testing companies, like intentionally like have different phases for some of their relay testers and things like that, or like Omicron would be different from Doble and things like that. Like I just had no idea, and to be able to comprehend that, you have to have the reps and sets with the equipment and just be extremely intelligent. So you know.
Yeah, being out in the field and sometimes like renting test equipment, or we've worked underneath somebody else's banner a lot of times, and they'll say, "Well, here we'll send you a test set," and then all of a sudden you're like, "Well, I know how to do this work, but I don't know this test equipment," and
Right.
so you spend you spend almost as much time familiarizing yourself with how the test equipment works. And I love Megger, but like their SMRT, I tell the guys before you leave out of here, upgrade your firmware
Yes.
and upgrade your software. And invariably, like the time it takes to get to the job site, it's changed. It's like, how did that happen? But if you ever have a problem with it, that's the first thing the Megger engineer or whoever's on the line is going to ask you.
Firmware.
Hey, did you upgrade the firm? What's your firmware edition? Oh, what's your software edition? I'm like, come on, guys. This should be automatic or something. But it's
It makes
not.
you wonder if it's not like, everything seems like it's going to an as a service thing, like software as a service. Maybe we're at relay test sets as a service now to where you have
They
to,
definitely do
you know,
have some of the software out there that's service related and fee based. So
yeah, everybody, and like I've heard, differences from like the dive software to the Basilar, working with the Basilars, and some will say that the Omicron stuff's the only way to go. And then a lot of folks don't realize it's not just the test set. You have to know all the tabs that are involved up at the top of the software to figure out what makes sense and things like that.
yes, the software can be tricky especially on relay test sets, and then some of the more complex transformer test equipment. It's not all just plug and play, and and it's kind of frustrating to some of us old guys where the test sets have become kind of place these wires here, press this button,
Right.
wait 38 seconds, here's your result. We're like, well, man, we used to have to like think about that. You
Right.
take an old hand crank TTR and you could feel the resistance if you wired it
Right.
up backwards, like, oh, that's not right. Let me fix my leads here.
Well, and like you said, the feedback, and then I think it also, and I mean, this is maybe going off track a little bit, but the perishability of the skill set, like it's not just a matter of, hey, can my technician go hook up to, these terminals and do, what are you actually testing for? Do you understand the theory of constraints behind it and the theory of the electrical, of everything that's tied to that? And if you lose that skill set, like you need to at least have a robust understanding of the fundamentals, or so it seems to be from the talks that I have. Like I said, I'm just a electrical power technology graduate from like 20 years ago who never touched it via the Navy. But from a common sense, like that, those are perishable skills, and
Yeah.
just with the continuing evolution of technology, you're still going to have a core group of folks that are really good in that area. But if it's the end user doesn't understand the ramifications of not hooking up something correctly, or has a robust troubleshooting ability or skill set, then obviously it's a perishable skill, I think. And I know you and I have had an opportunity to talk. So you have a formal education background, but can you kind of allude to how you prep for your NETA 2 and 3? Where did you get your skills? Was it all on site? And do you think the guys that are currently going through that are struggling maybe more so than the old school techs that had to do all the stuff the old way?
Um, Likely, yeah, because we talk about a lot oftentimes in our office about testing a device, which is one degree of difficulty, and then knowing how that device fits in the system. And really, we need to test the system. And
Right.
this comes especially true when we're commissioning. You're looking at the system as a whole and where does this device fit in the system. When we're doing acceptance testing, then you break it down and you start with just testing the device. Is it good? Yes, it's good. And that's kind of where the junior level guys a lot of times can come in and knock that out. But it's when you think about a system as a whole, and then the complexity of those systems, to your point, continue to get more and more difficult or complex as we move forward. Today in a data center, you may have a 3 main switchgear lineup with a computer controlled uh, processor, like basically a PLC that's looking at all the different inputs, what the demand, the load, and should we start the generator or should we Should we switch to the backup power supply or the generator? They have three mains coming in. And so
Right.
the complexity of testing a system as a whole is much more difficult than it was 25 years ago, especially. Now, some of the, when you get into substations and relays, you've now got communication protocols that instead of hardwired back and forth, you're now using fiber and comm lines to talk between distance relays and such to kind of bridge that gap and create a better protective system. It's better. It's probably even, you could say, more robust. I recently read a book called Anti-Fragile, and which is a really great one. It's kind of deep, but thinking about a system as being robust or anti-fragile. Robust means it's going to hold up. Anti-fragile means it gets better when it's put under pressure. It would be lovely if we could figure out how to create an electrical system that was anti-fragile,
Would be
but it's
great.
not. And you could even argue that today our system isn't even robust. In the 50s and 60s, it was fairly robust. There was a lot of money thrown at it. The design software, the design, not software, I guess what I'm trying to go with that is like transformer design. It was done with a slide rule. And so there was always a margin of error put in
Right.
for, hey, we're not sure about this curve, let's give it 20%, or even if it was only 5%. Today, we have software, we can do simulations, we're doing modeling, and we're like, oh, let's get that down to 2% because every ounce of copper we put into this transformer, or every ounce of the special steel in the core is expensive. And so we're
Right.
trying to get the cost to the very minimum. And we don't care if it lasts 50 years. We're looking for a 20-year lifespan. We don't want 19 years, but we really don't want 24 either. And so how do you dial that in from a, you know, plat-
Literally planning obsolescence into the equipment, whereas it used to be just build it to last type thing. Seems like
yeah,
to
and I
some
hate to,
extent, anyway.
yeah, I hate to say they just, the lifespan of a transformer has always been, if you look at like the guidelines, has always been 20 years. But we have a ton of transformers in our system that are 60 and 70 years old
Right.
just because of that. There used to be a margin of error. We used to also like, oh, we need a 750. Let's buy a 1000 kVA. There was just at every point in the system almost we had like this small or medium sized margin of error, and now they're all small margins of error or even beyond. Um,
Absolutely. Now, do you think any of that ties to like the complexity of the gear that it feeds now? I'm assuming like there's some stuff that's going to be 400 hertz and you want to rectify it and clean up the signals to make sure that you're not frying the end user. Does any of that kind of come into play with that kind of stuff?
Well, absolutely. You've got switch mode power supplies is the kind of generic term, but VFDs and any kind of frequency modulation in the system um, all of a sudden now turns what used to be a simple cross the line starter. You had some inrush current, and now you've got something that's running at some strange frequency all the time. So harmonics continue to be an issue in the system. You've got, K factor transformers, which is going back to that old kind of rule and standard where they're putting about 30% more copper in them so that they can,
Right.
so that they're robust enough to cool down and handle the harmonics. Um, but it makes troubleshooting a lot harder too. Like, okay, did the system fail? Is there a problem with a device in the system? Do we have a failure, like a fault? Or is there some kind of harmonic glitch that our protective devices aren't used to handling? And so we're creating some situation there that has to be ruled out. And those are much more difficult. We call them gremlins a lot of times in the system, and they only raise their head every so often.
Yep.
We've spent weeks chasing stuff that 2:30 a.m. in the morning or something. It's like, okay, I'm staying up all night. I'm gonna watch this thing because I've looked at the data over and over again. Looks like some kind of harmonic switching. Well, it's some capacitor bank that came on at the exact same time every time. But narrowing it down and figuring that out is a challenge. So our young techs, that theory behind it, you can go out and do so much work right out of the gate now because you do have sophisticated test equipment
Right.
that has a nice GUI and they're used to playing a video game. And so, hey, man, you give them a computer and they can run that sucker. But do they know what the results are telling them? If it
Right.
looks abnormal, then what? If it looks normal, they're good. They can do 1,000 of them. But when it looks abnormal, that's where their limitation comes in. And so it's a development thing, and it requires us older guys really, investing in the young folks to try to push down some of that information.
Absolutely. And I agree with you. And it does seem like we're oftentimes falling on, we rely so heavily on the technology of it. And like you said, it doesn't take anything special to give somebody a test set and the software to do it. As long as you have the protocols there, it's nothing more than preventative maintenance. Toggle this in the software, hook it up, do the readings fall here and here. All right, cool, next. But then you look on the backside, if it doesn't, so what? Now we have to actually do some real work here and troubleshoot. And do you think that the NETA construct does a good job of training to that as an overarching regulatory kind of body? Or does that question kind of make sense?
Maybe I'll take a stab at it. How about that?
Fair enough.
The NETA construct. So there's one side of it in which it absolutely forces this, and that's the 25% rule. You can only have 25% of your technicians must be level 3 or 4 or above, level 3 or level 4. And so there's some part of that dynamic that in your workspace you should always have a senior tech overseeing the work. And if you read like the ETT, which is electrical test technician specification. So that's what tells how many CEUs you have to have, how much experience you have to test for each level, because we have to, as owners or as the NETA representative of the company, has to sign off that this individual has actually spent this much time in the field or whatever, or they've had this kind of background that allows them to go ahead and move forward. Level 2, you got to have 2 years experience. Level 3, you got to have 5 years experience. Level 4, you got to have 8 years experience. So, and then there's a ton of criteria: safety training, annual training, updated, your CTDs as they call them, the continuing technical
Training and development
training
credits, I think.
development credits. Yeah. So all of those things are in the ETT, and that document really is a guideline that says you won't have a bunch of people out here that don't know what they're doing, because for every three that you have, you could hire 3 that know absolutely nothing, but then you got to have a level 3 or a level 4 with them.
And would
In
you say that that's pretty
practicality,
hard to fudge too, right? You're not going to go in there and fake that till you make it. You literally have to have the requisite knowledge and skill sets, especially at the 3 and 4 level.
oh, absolutely. But how it breaks down in the company is like we mentioned earlier, that the level 4 might be sitting at a desk at the office, and you might have 5 of them in the office. That means you got 20 guys in the field that may or may not. I don't think there's any companies out there that are like that. There's and just the practicality of them. You wouldn't hire 20 guys the same day and turn them loose on a job site,
Right.
but you could end up having a couple crews that have limited experience.
Right. I
And
can see
NETA
that.
doesn't prevent that necessarily, even though they have stipulated to try to help keep that. Where I would say that they absolutely don't do a great job, and as being part of NETA, we've tried to self-correct this over the years, is where do you get this training? So I'll put a plug in for Richmond Community College up in North Carolina, Long Beach Community College out in California. They both run really great programs that are training guys to come out of there and really hit the ground running as a technician. But if you think about what I just said, East Coast, West Coast, they're the only 2 I know of.
That's crazy.
And I make it a point to try to know about those things. I'm not. There might be one in between that comes close. I know, like Chattanooga has a great EPB, which is their electrical power board up there, has a great substation that they teach people on at UTC. But but it's not the same as like a test technician like these other programs are.
Now, what about one I've heard mentioned often is like testguy.net is one for online resources. I heard the name Chris Werstiak for relay testing, and I know that's kind of narrowing the niche a little bit. Do you have any online references that you would send folks to other than those community college or those programs where folks would have a hard time perhaps getting there? I know that one kind of caught it, it's out from left field,
Yeah, you hit me
but
with that one. That's all right. There's I definitely would say like the Paul Gill book. I think I mentioned that before. I forget what it's called, Fundamentals or something like that of electrical testing. But if you look Paul Gill and put in electrical testing on Amazon, it literally breaks
GILL.
GILL. Yep, he's been in our. He wrote a book 30 years ago, and then he revised it. Maybe it's probably less than 5 years since its last revision. Um, and it's a good fundamental. Like it breaks every test down to this is how we're doing it, and this is why we're doing it, and it's not test set specific. So it talks more like voltage source, meter, current source, which is the old school way of thinking about it.
Right.
And these, but if you're a young tech and you know how to push the button, go get the Gill book because it is going to really open your eyes as to why you're doing. I mean, I say, you may already understand that. I don't mean every young tech's that way, but if you're used to just pushing the button and you're not real sure why you're pushing the button, it's an expensive book. It's like a textbook. It's
Gotcha.
because there's not enough of us out there to buy enough to make them cheap.
Right.
It's like $200, but it'd probably be one of the better $200 you spend on your career.
Okay.
I'd put it right there with a good tool bag. You need that resource. It's put you to sleep reading. He doesn't make it. It's definitely not a comic book. It's not a.
There's
It's
no
not a
personality to it.
it's not a graphic novel, guys. It's going to be hard to read, but it's one way to learn, and it's always accessible. It's not.
Right.
I think maybe you and I have talked about this before, but just since you brought it up like this, there's very few resources. Like if you want to know how to change your toilet, you can go on YouTube and if you got 10 hours, you can watch 30 guys changing out their toilets and probably go change out your toilet. What I've found is that's not very true about NETA.
Yep.
And maybe that's a good thing. I've got a bunch of videos stashed in a hard drive somewhere that has a bunch of technical training, and it's like it's that to-do list that you never get to. It hadn't got to YouTube yet.
Come on, Brian, you got to share that stuff with the world, man. We got to make the change.
And we've got some friends in the industry that have some out there,
Right?
And so
right.
you could go look up like Mose Ramey. He's done some stuff, and
I know Mose.
Thomas Wire has done. Lately, I've seen a lot of his stuff hit the ground, and it's good stuff. And so you've got this situation where like, well, I don't want to go out and be like emulating them, but sometimes, I mean, obviously it didn't bother the guys changing out their toilets. There's 4,000 of them, So, hey, if you're needed in the NETA space, show us how you do it. And of course, there's always that risk of being criticized, and that's fine, but help other people learn it.
Absolutely, and that's kind of why we do these impromptu, informal interviews. I don't know; it may eventually turn into a podcast or something. I don't know, but the cool thing is for one, it's just fascinating work. I mean, literally, you can't turn around without seeing something that's powered by electricity. So, just by proxy, and like even the NERC stuff, like I'm enjoying the heck out of figuring out substation transmission and how things push and how it steps down and all that from a grid perspective. So I mean, it's
Yeah.
around you, and I mean, even just a rudimentary top level knowledge of this stuff. I mean, it may not serve you well. I don't think we're going to be Jack and Jill from across the street aren't climbing, utility poles to change out an insulated coil or an insulator.
I would say this is a plug that I make often is, and I got it off of Bill Gates' reading list. I think maybe 2016 or something. But Gretchen Bach book, The Grid. Say that
Okay.
again. Gretchen Bach, and I think it's Bakke.
Okay.
It is she does a fabulous job of breaking down just the entire grid from, how renewables have their place and where they fit and the constraints
Yep.
and of course the benefits. She does a good job of being equalizing and not being necessarily for or against too much, but just a revelation. I think anybody that has a business that relies on power should read The Grid by Gretchen Bach. So
There is so much minutia. Like a lot of people don't understand. Like there's back power that goes, and like we talked about resonance and harmonics and all that other stuff. All that stuff has a play on quality. It's not just this magic box that that powers your house. There's a lot more to it. And so, like I said, I just find this stuff fascinating in general. So that's definitely some good stuff. So I got another one for you here. So we've talked pretty heavily with regards to technicianing. You are the CEO of a company. How did technicianing help you CEO at all?
oh man, you know, it helped me that if there's an issue in the field and somebody has a problem, I kind of understand it. I was woefully unprepared to run a business, and I had done that. I mean, you would look at if I handed out my business card in 2007 and 8, it said operations manager of a NETA testing company. Um, I had zero P&L um, overview. I couldn't. I had no. I didn't even have any insight into the P&L. My boss would tell me occasionally, "Man, we're not making enough money," and I'd be like, "Maybe we're spending money in the
Make a
wrong
lot of money.
place," or he would say, "Oh, you're killing it, Brian. You're doing great." Those were rare, but
Same. I
uh,
have that same
you
pain.
know, it was occasional. He got one of those about 2 or 3 times a year, maybe. Um, but I didn't know what the dollars meant, like a dollar in, dollar out. Yeah, I could see when I spent money on a job directly, and so I tell my guys a lot of times that's like the high level. If you want to look at that, hey, you need to be making 60% profit probably on what you can see: your labor, your
Absolutely.
materials, you know, did you buy lunch for the client? Did you buy a bunch of drinks for the guys? Hotel rooms, travel, the stuff that you can see, that direct above the line. We call it above the line in P&L now. I am learning some stuff
You
about it.
are. Look at that. That's some
Um,
business terminology.
above the line cost of goods, our goal, and I'm giving away secret sauce here, maybe not. Maybe everybody's like, well, everybody knows that, Brian, but
No.
um, and you get 60% above the line and you're still going to have a hard time like down here at the bottom after we've paid for insurances and a home
Workman's
office
comp and
and all the well, I could go through a list of like both hands of the list of different insurances we have,
yeah.
automotive, health insurance, liability, errors and omissions, and it goes on and on and on. So next to labor, insurance is our highest cost, but then you come to the bottom, after you've bought the postage stamps, and
Right.
it's not a ton of money. I mean, it's not a big percentage. It's better than grocery stores, but it's not a big percentage. And so, you look across the industry, and there's in NETA at any given time right now, there's about 100 companies, and so you've got 100 choices. You can go look at the CEOs, and a lot of them are getting kind of wrapped up and
They
spooled
are.
up into bigger and bigger companies. And it's not a bad business to be in. Don't hear what I'm not saying, but it's not like at the end of the day I'm taking home 30% of what we make. It's always been moderate, and for us, we've always given back a lot. We dedicate like at least 10% of our profits go back into the community. We give back 20% to our guys in a form of kind of a I won't call it profit sharing, but it's a bonus pool that comes from our profits. And so we try to keep, we kind of, it's kind of circular, and then we have a commitment to put so much money back into our equipment as well, so that I worked for a place, and it was tough sometimes to get new equipment because the money isn't always there on the table. And so we dedicate that ahead of time. And so it's kind of like paying it forward. We know that we're going to have a budget that we can spend on equipment. And if whether it's new trucks or if it's the latest and greatest, we just got this new SPI 4000 from Megger, and it's a brand new primary injection set. We got one of the first ones made. That was super exciting for the guys to get their hands on that, and it's now we're going more towards push button, right? So you can actually upload the curve from the breaker, and the primary injection test set will go up and put out the output current and hit the curve and tell you if it hit for the time, and you can put in. So it's kind of like an automated primary injection set, which, if anybody understands what a primary injection set is, we call them the Frankenstein machine, because the old ones all had this big wheel on it. It's like you're twisting the current up, you're sitting there kind of driving the thing and watching the meter while you're going. So now they've got like a feedback loop on it, and it's microprocessor driven. It's probably some kind of VFD in there that's switch mode power supply that's actually creating the current instead of a big huge transformer. It's half the size of the old one. Anyhow, all these great benefits. We do that because it's what the guys. When you asked me about CEO, boy, I got way off track there.
Well, no, you're good, and all this is super valid, man, and that's why we keep this thing informal. I'm here, and I just enjoy sitting back and listening to it. But I think you bring up a very, very key point. And I mean, we're not running, in the millions yet by any stretch of the imagination. But having built out some stuff in the retail space, I helped a buddy. We started a retail scrub shop called Uniform Locker down in Biloxi, and it's doing really well and all that. But it was interesting and eye opening to me, coming from a military, 20 plus years of doing this jazz. Like, Keystone markup is literally 100% markup, and you're like, oh, we're gonna kill it, we're making all this money, until you understand how cash flows work and budgets work and the overhead costs and the insurance and the liability and just all. I just wrap it all up and call it overhead. And you weren't lying, man. Cash flow is king. If you don't have cash flow, you may be making all these deals, but if it's not flowing through it in a frequent way to where you can track it and and do all that, there's not a lot. And that's what really you see all the technicians are like, it's the big guy at the top that's making up. No, we're not. It's not. It's like, or saying a Musk is worth, almost $1 trillion or whatever it may be. It's all tied up in the company, right? It's to the betterment and the cash flows and all that. So thank you for sharing that. Like I said, I think it's truly enlightening for some folks who may not have understood like some of the constraints, just because like we may have amassed a couple of nice things along the way. It's usually a byproduct of doing this for years and years and decades and managing it from that perspective. You know what I mean? So, but yeah, man, cash flow is definitely king in this thing. So
I probably got it. If I've got something, I probably got it the same way my technicians did. Put a little bit aside, a little bit at a time until you got enough to go by.
Exactly. Well, unless you want to run on like, well, not everybody's wired, and we won't talk about folks' consumable or consumer spending habits for fear of alienating some folks. But I've known some that'll go out and put it all on credit too. So.
Yeah.
But well, kind of looking back, so we've talked technician, we've talked CEO. Looking back, would you change anything?
Oh, sure. I mean, there's hundreds of things I would change, but overarching, defining our mission, vision, and core values earlier, allowing that to permeate all of our decision process earlier. It's kind of one of those, I don't know, maybe not everybody's this way, but I'm kind of mule headed. I'd heard it was a great idea, and I kind of pseudo did it, and then it sat there. Maybe we put it on the wall or whatever, but did we actually use it? And I'd say today it really defines our culture and who we are, and that's very important to us today. We let it drive our process of how we hire people. We use it, or we are as we do any kind of expansion, if we're analyzing, business expansion into different regions or different markets, we're constantly going back to those core values and mission and vision statement to try to just see if everything still aligns, because you get caught up in the moment of something and it sound really good, and those things, when you took the time to do them well, and you sought good input from outside sources and internal sources, and everybody got buy-in on them, they're they're who you are, and you already determined that. But we are who we are. But there are moments where we get caught up in something that's like, oh, well, maybe that would be better, or maybe that would be bigger, or maybe this would be, maybe, maybe we look at the guy down the street that's doing, I always said if I was starting all over, I'd do a plumbing company, because everybody needs a plumber, and not everybody needs electrical testing.
That whole supply and demand thing,
But the
right? It
people
still
that
exists.
need it, they really do need it. And so anyhow, it's kind of like the grass is always greener on the other side.
Of course.
Um, and so, but your mission and vision core values will kind of prevent you from going, they'll prevent you from running over to the next pasture when you need to be watering your own.
And I would say also, like, one of the things, and I couldn't agree more, that's how we run business here. Core values drive everything that we do. And then a frequent refresher, right? So a lot of us, and I've seen it. I did some consulting work for what it's worth. And you always say, well, what is your culture? What are your core values and all that? Oh, they're in our employee handbook. I couldn't tell you what they are. So you wrote them one time, or you hired a consultant to come in and do all this stuff, and then you don't constantly, reinforce and review them, then it's not. So kudos to you. You guys sound like you're doing that end of the spectrum very well. I mean, well, and the fact that I got the eyebrow raise shows that you're humble enough to know that we could always do more. Right?
It was in our weekly meeting
Eyebrow.
this week that we were like, we need to reiterate these even more often. So even if you're doing a good job of it, there's always room
Got
for
always
growth.
room for
So,
more.
yeah.
Absolutely. So you guys we've been talking NETA stuff for a minute, and we know that AMP is a NETA accredited company. How hard is that to do for background? I've talked with Tom, I've talked with Mike Labite and some of these other guys that NETA 4s, 3s, 2s, right? And they understand what it takes from a technician's perspective. What does that look like from a company's perspective?
It's a deep dive into your financial situation. Obviously, you have to be structured correctly to begin with. If you're not, you're probably not going to go that. You're probably not going to restructure your company just to be NETA. Maybe I do know some guys that have had like electrical contracting companies, and they've said, "Oh no, we want to restructure and do this instead," and so we're going to go. So the big deal is they're looking at ownership. Can you be influenced by somebody outside? You have to be able to perform a certain percentage of the list of NETA services, and I think that's maybe 30 or 40 things. Apparatus, different types of apparatus, and some engineering things, infrared and that kind of stuff. How much of that are you capable of, or have you shown that you're doing? If you wanted to start a new NETA company tomorrow, they require you to have 2 years worth of financial data before they'll process your application to move forward. And so you can kind of get the ball started with them and get all the requirements, but you have to be in business for 2 years. And so probably the hardest requirement for most companies is getting the certified technicians. So if you're going from no certified technicians to, okay, we got to get them all in, get them tested, got to take them out of the field to do that, give them some time maybe to study, or maybe they're great technicians and you're confident they can pass. But I've had some great technicians that just don't take tests well.
Absolutely.
And so that's a challenge. And so, everybody runs into that. And so they have a process and they move you through phases. I won't say it's difficult necessarily, but it's a lot of information. It's like trying to get a pretty deep loan, a business loan. You're going to give them all your financial data for the last couple of years, and maybe tax returns and a few other things, and then one of the things that we found out that we we're AMP LLC, and that's how we're formed. But we were using this AMP Quality Energy Services as kind of just a tagline, I thought. And Ken Bassett, you mentioned him earlier. He's the membership director at NETA, and of course the CEO of a NETA testing company. Most of the directors on the NETA in NETA are volunteers, and they're doing the same thing you're doing. And so he flew in and looked at our stuff, and he's like, Brian, you've got to file something with the state saying this is who you are, So we had to do a DBA, doing
Yeah.
business as this AMP Quality Energy Services. But he's a great guy. He's fairly approachable, and they care. They want to bring people on board, so they don't water down the standards that we have. We have bylaws that say what you have to be as a NETA company, but they're going to help you try to figure out how to meet those requirements.
And that actually was another question I had kind of in line with that. So they actually come on site, come and evaluate. What does that look like? Like, do they just like some NETA god falls from the sky and shows up and says, "Thou have a relay test set," or
Well, yeah, you've already uploaded all that stuff that you
Okay.
have, your equipment list. You've already uploaded all your financials. So, but they may come into your job file and just grab a file or say, "Hey, pull up a report. Let's look at a couple reports." You do have to upload a few sample reports with the application process, and there's a standard format. It's in the front of the NETA specifications. It says you got to have a cover sheet, you got to have an executive summary, you've got to have table of contents. It needs to be orderly. I mean,
Right.
they do a good job of making the NETA companies look good, because if you don't have any processes or controls, you can go straight to the NETA guidelines, and it gives you most of them.
Gotcha.
Um, so if you,
Was another question I was literally going to ask is like, so they actually do provide you guys like almost a template, would you say, to some
it's the
extent, or
specifications for it.
okay,
And so you know how specifications are. Everybody interprets them differently, but
absolutely,
but the information is there telling you
gotcha.
what you have to have, how you want to display that. If you want to do it graphically, or if you want a 5-page executive summary or a half-page executive summary, that's all up to you. But it has to be in there. Yeah.
Very, very cool. So this is where it's going to get a little bit more personal here. So for one, I appreciate you. We've had an opportunity to talk multiple times over multiple weeks now, and so this is where I can kind of break down and put you in the hot seat, if you will. What makes AMP or what makes you stand out amongst your competitors?
Our people, first and foremost. I mean, and then so because of that, as I was saying earlier about kind of our culture and how we interview, we have a culture interview first. And if they don't meet our culture, then you could be the brightest guy in the industry. You're not going to work at AMP if you don't fit our culture. And that's for your protection and ours both. If you
Agreed.
don't fit our culture, you're not going to be happy here. And so we don't want unhappy employees. We want happy employees. And so that's the whole point. I guess, Richard Branson said, find a job you love or whatever. You never work a day in your life or something. I don't know if he was the one that first said it. He gets credited with it a lot. I always said, or maybe no, what he said was, if you take care of your employees, they'll take care of the customers. I
I
always
always put
said,
that other one on Churchill. I put any
yeah,
attainable
yeah,
quote. We'll
I
just say
got that.
Churchill for
Yeah,
everything.
I shouldn't be quoting anybody. My brain is
You and me
anyhow.
both.
But and you always think you're the first one to say anything. But I did start with this written down, and it's in some of our original documents. Quality energy services from quality employees.
Love it.
And so then, okay, well, that's generic. Everybody's got quality in their core values or whatever. But how do we define that? And we say that that's like a good balance of your personal and business life. Um, are you plugged into your community? Are you healthy? There's a lot of things that cause people to be quality and to bring quality aspects to the job and to the world around them. And so, if we want you to be a good husband. If you are a husband, If you're a father, we want you to be a good father. If you're a wife, we want you to be a good wife. We want you to be attentive to those needs of others around you, because if you're attentive to the needs in your home, you're probably going to be attentive to the needs of our clients. And so, just basic breakdown of hey, if it works, people usually are who they are everywhere. And that you can do the personality test and they'll be like, well, this is your projected personality and this is your actual personality and this is the one that you have only when
Right.
you're at home or whatever. But there's only so far you can move that mark. You are who you are, and it's not just personality. We're trying to hire for character. And the skill sets, we've found that we can cultivate and grow those skill sets, but it takes time. NETA, the NETA requirements alone, even if you've got a great technician, he can't sit for his level 3 until they've been in the industry for 5 years. So and that's not far cry from the truth. What I've found in 25 years of watching guys, that even if you come out of prime power, I've met guys that were in prime power for 10, 15, maybe one guy was in maybe even close to 20 years. That was what he did.
Mm-hmm.
He was bright. He knew the stuff. But there's a lot of guys, and it's smart. I've met a lot of them that get in for the last 2 to 3 years working that MOS just so that they have something to bring to the table when they come out. It's a great idea. I highly recommend it. But just know, if you come out after 3 years, if you haven't done a lot of pouring into yourself, you're probably not going to just go sit for the level 3 and pass it. It's prime power is great. It equips people very well, but there's nothing like time in the field
Yeah.
and reoccurring seeing things and getting that programmed in and being able to troubleshoot, and just the diversity of how much you've been exposed to.
Absolutely. And I think it's kind of funny you mentioned that, specifically from the Prime Power. We just wrapped up the interview with Tom Wire and Mike Labite. And that guy, coming from that 12P background and learning more about what they do is truly phenomenal. And he's doing some crazy stuff. We just talked about lightning protection today and ground resistance. And the guy's going out and learning like all the equipment from Doble and Omicron and Megger, like and moonlighting, and doing all these things to set himself up for success. Whereas on the other hand, I've also had folks that have reached out, we won't mention names, that are like, hey, can you get me a job as a NETA tech? Like if you're not showing the adaptability, and I think this kind of alludes to the culture and the drive, we're looking for independent, self-driven, smart, reliant people that will ultimately represent us, whatever your business may be. And and that definitely highlights the point of what you're saying is on this end of the spectrum, you have somebody who's doing it, in my opinion, the right way, advice the other that's like, hey, can you help me? Like, I want to see that you're culturally driven to own the process, and because I don't want to expend the additional bandwidth to have to babysit, if you will. And I know babysit may be a little bit of a harsh term, but it just goes to show of the cultural alignment and kind of doing it. So kudos to you guys on that, man, for sure. And then, so quick question: as a technician that comes to that's getting ready to come to work for AMP, what does that onboarding process look like? And then, kind of why would you suggest that those people actually work for you? We kind of touched on the quality of life and the core values that represents very well from the company side and the tech side. But what are some of the things that you guys do differently from your contemporaries or peers?
So I guess first off, AMP, if somebody's going to put this on their shirt, I want to make sure that they represent us well. This is Allie, Maggie, and Penelope, my 3 oldest daughters. And so we started this company in 2009, because I was traveling I can't even hardly express how much I was traveling and how often and how crazy it was when it happened. I came in on a Friday afternoon. Hey, be in Houston Monday. You're going to be there for 3 months. You can't live. I mean, we had actually had our 4th daughter on the way when I started AMP, and you can't live as a family guy and expect your kids. I go and be gone for a couple of weeks. I come home and my 3-year-old, she doesn't she looks totally different. There's so much development that's happening in those early stages that I was missing out on. So we built the company around the idea that, hey, most guys in the field are family guys, and so we want them to be able to spend that time. And if you're not a family guy, you've got something that matters to you that you want to invest in. And so I ask our guys often, like, hey, if you could do anything, money was no object, what would it be? And who knows what that, maybe a guy says, well, man, if money was no object, I'd be a missionary.
Right.
Well, okay. How can we put together a 5-year plan where you feel like you're missional in your work? Maybe you don't ever go to Africa, but maybe you go to downtown and you're serving, the inner city children and you're tutoring and stuff like that. And we make space for that for them. I'm looking to figure out how to get them to that goal,
Beautiful.
even if it means they leave AMP. Guy comes in and said, well, I always wanted to be an accountant. Well, okay, you're working, you're going to go over here and we're going to start showing you the books and help you how do you get back into school? How do you get refreshed? I don't know. Whatever it is, that's my goal, is when I ask that question, is not to see like who they're made of or whatever.
Right.
It's, well, how can I help you get there? Some of them just, they want to be an automotive mechanic. Well, you can do that on the weekend and get a lot of fulfillment from it. So there's that side. The other side was the travel was so much that we try to keep our guys. I would love to say that our guys don't travel at all, but it wouldn't be the truth, and you wouldn't probably believe me anyways. But we try to keep it down to like a week a month on average. Or if they have to go out of town, we'll bring them home on the weekends. We're constantly negotiating with our clients to say, yes, we can cover that job. We'll do that, but or the whole method of how we go about opening new practices. If we get a big, we'll look for a place where we can put an anchor point, and so we'll go to a new market. We just opened up in Atlanta, and we're hiring guys in Atlanta so that they don't have to travel. So our guys don't have to travel, and they don't have to travel. And
Makes
so
sense.
instead of just saying, well, man, we're going to have 100 guys right here underneath this roof, and we'll send them everywhere, or we're going to put, wherever they are, we'll bring them in. Yes, do we have some overlap? Guys have to travel back and forth to help out, sure, but we take that into consideration into that. um, you know and my goal is that they have a minimal amount of travel, and when they do travel, we give them some things take 2 to 3 weeks out of town, and when they do, they come back and we're like, okay, well, hey, take a couple of days off, do something with your family, get plugged back in wherever you are. Everybody needs relationship, and it needs to be your relationship. It doesn't need to just be your work relationship. It needs to be relationship of your choosing. Maybe
Absolutely.
maybe it's your granddad who doesn't have that many years left. Go spend some time with him.
I love that. No, and it just alludes back to the culture side of things and just taking care of your people, right? And you see it on the macro scale, just like I'm sure I do if you're following the news and everything, and everybody talks quiet quitting and all of these other, all this other whatever the coined lingo of the week is. But ultimately, I think it is like um, it's just it's going from culture to from transactional to culture and kind of building that. Like I hate when people call it family, right? But like to build a team, to build a team of folks who have a similar drive and interest in pursuing things down the same path, or a like-minded goal, if you will, and kind of driving to that and just taking care of each other,
That's where
so
those mission vision
kudos.
core values come back into play, because you already know there's that alignment that they want what you want, and you've made it public. You've talked about it. It's not like, oh, I want this and they want that, and we never come to I don't know what they want. And they don't know what I want. Well, what does that look like? That looks like chaos, right? And so,
Absolutely.
knowing that inherent, we all have some basic needs in life, right? And so we want affirmation. We want security. We want to know what an identity. Every man wants to have an identity, or man or woman identity, affirmation, security. What are those things, and how can we're not here to be all of it for them, you know. I'm
Right.
not, but what part can we play in that, you
Right.
know? And when we notice that somebody's low on affirmation, or maybe they have a bigger need for that, or they have a bigger need for identity, or they have a bigger need for security, how can we press into that spot and help them establish that, you know? How can we help them? You know, we hire a lot of young guys because there's just not that many NETA technicians in the market, you know, and if I get one, I've got to go get it from a competitor.
Yep.
And so there's always been that conundrum for me, like, okay, if they fit our culture, then we're probably going to be a better fit for them and a good advantage for their family. But my goal isn't to go out here and get all the guys from all the other places. I want to develop. We probably develop a greater percentage of technicians. I guess I'm going on record here of calling these guys out. We develop a greater percentage of technicians than probably just about any other NETA company out there,
Very cool.
um, because we believe in people and we want them from here. So the other thing is, if you hire from another company, I got to move them maybe across the United States or something. If that's not what they really want, they might do it if I offer them enough cash,
Right.
but that's not a lasting motivator, you know. And so yeah, if their grandma, their mom lives in the area and they want to move back here and they're working for some NETA company across the country, I'm not saying we wouldn't do that. It's just not our primary focus. We're more looking for somebody who isn't plugged in, or who is young, and or maybe they're changing careers. We've had guys that completely change, go from a call center manager to a NETA level 3 in 4 or 5 years. Those are
That's
neat
cool.
stories, you know. Okay, he
Yeah,
wanted to do something
absolutely.
different. He topped out, and that, you know, maybe not topped out, but the road to go up was a lot longer in that arena. And so we found out about him and hired him, and now he's a level 3 technician, you know, and he's thriving in our world.
That is awesome, and just to be able to do that, because we've already talked to, I believe we in one of our other conversations we had offline, I think we said there's only 10,000 NETA technicians thereabout. Is that still pretty close to that?
Yeah, I don't know if they'd ever. I don't know if that they actually tell you that, but it's less than 10,000 for sure. Um, threes and fours, maybe I should say.
Okay.
Level twos. I don't know how many level twos there are. It could be 10,000 level twos, but I know the threes and fours, it's less than 10,000. So, and that's kind of that break point in our certification, right? I mean, that's because that's what you got to have if you want to expand.
Right.
Level 2 is great. Don't hear me say that if you've got your level 2, there's anything wrong. It's a tough exam too. That in some ways, the level 2 is more difficult than the level 3, just because of
I've
the
heard that.
broad
Yeah.
base. It's kind of strange. Maybe because of the 5 years experience, right? You're getting hit with stuff at 2 years that you really hadn't been exposed to, whereas at 5 years you have.
Right.
I don't know. That just came out the top of my head. I've never thought about that before, but anyhow, level 2 is great, but level 3 is what really, that allows me to build and expand my business. If I've got another level 3, now I can hire 3 guys under him and develop them.
Because you said at least one, 3 or 4 to
It's
every
25% of your work
25.
of your
Right.
work for force has to be threes and fours.
And then, so let's say Micah, Seaman Micah, right, decided he was going to do a 6YO, get out, and we're having a conversation, and I decide I want to come to work for AMP. From interview up until start day, what does that process look like? What does your interview process look like? Kind of what would an individual looking to come join your team, what could they expect?
So we do 3 major interviews. We may do a quick phone call or something to get acquainted at first, but the first interview is culture, because like I said, if they don't fit our culture, they don't go any further. The second interview is technical, and so that's like, okay, we like this guy, he fits our culture. Does he have the technical side that meets the demands of his pay scale or whatever? I mean, that can be, or it could just be, where do we place him in our system? But we want to know how much does he know technically. And then the last interview is kind of like the if you got to that point, then you're probably close to a shoe in, but not everybody makes it past it, and that's what we call the spouse interview. And so they
I'm,
do
I'm I'm intrigued. You've got my eyebrows raised, so I'm listening here.
they do dinner with myself and my wife,
Very cool.
and you have to get past her. And so,
Leaning heavily into women's intuition. I love it.
man, you know, there's been times where she was like, Brian, why did you let them get this far? And then there's time, you know, a lot, she's very gracious. So if to the world out there, if you ever interview an amp, don't let that be a hard thing. She is very gracious, but she knows me better than any person on earth.
Yep, same.
She knows my blindnesses. I take business decisions to her, and she's not a businesswoman, but she knows people and she can read people really quick. Um, and so, you know, and then you learn a lot from their spouse.
Yes.
We had one, we hired this guy, believe it or not. I probably shouldn't have said that.
Believe it or not.
She said, well, he has a hard time getting out of bed in the morning, so I hope this works out. And I was like, dude, you should have at least cautioned her about that, you know? So if your wife's a loose cannon and is liable to say just about anything, you might want to coach her a little bit. But anyhow, he was strong in a lot of other areas, and we were like, well, we're not going to put up with him not being here, so he's either going to work out or not. But
I love it.
you just never know what you're going to find out from their spouse, and we take the opportunity in that interview to explain that NETA testing, maintenance testing is you know, a lot of holidays. There's after hours call outs, and we got, you know, it is a very guy. I keep saying, I find myself saying this. It's a very guy strong industry, so you'll hear me kind of lean that way. But either way, whatever the spouse is, they need to know that you get called in the middle of the night, plant's down, they're not producing, they're losing anywhere from, you know, maybe 20,000 to $2 million an hour.
Exactly.
There's we'll move heaven and earth to get that plant back up and running. And that means you get out of bed and you come into work, and we stay there until it's back, you know. Right. We've had plants that, you know, we chartered jets to go to factories to get parts, and, you know, they don't, I mean, yeah, we spent $2 million by the time the end of the day, but they were losing $1 million an hour.
Right.
What's 2 million? It's a drop in the bucket when, you know, put 8,000 feet of new cable in a plant, you know, medium voltage cable in a plant to get them back up and running. Right. You just do what you have to do. So I explain, give them a few little stories, scenarios, let them know that Christmas isn't sacred. I don't care what grandma's tradition was. Thanksgiving's not sacred. Right. 4th of July is not sacred. I missed the first 9 Christmases of my career because we had this one little plant up in Tennessee that shut down only Christmas Day. And so 12 of us went up there every Christmas Day and worked a long day, 16 something hours. Well, my family just celebrated Christmas Eve. You know, I mean, it's.
Well, but what I think is very, very good, though, Brian, is the fact that you actually bring the family in. And like I said, we talk team versus family, but to me, and some would be like, that doesn't really make sense, perhaps, you know, from a corporate construct. But for me, I think it's ideal. And I'm just kind of, don't let me inflate the size of your head any here, but like, you're getting the full, it's literally full transparency. So, hey, wife, we're hanging out, you know, and you put a heavy value on culture, as do I. And so everything you're saying aligns wholly with my rudimentary opinion on things, or my humble opinion, rather. You know, I'm not saying it's the right way by any stretch, but I can see the value add and literally laying out the expectation for everybody involved. Because again, I will live by the adage, happy wife, happy life, you know? And so if you can figure that piece out and do things to kind of grease the skids, and because, you know, same, not NETA, but military, 10 deployments, 5 years floating around on a gray tin can in the middle of nowhere. Of course you miss those opportunities. But the cool thing is like you just know, because of the background and the culture of the military, deployments are a thing, right? And
Yeah.
so
And
at byproduct, the spouse signs up for that. And so you're literally doing the same thing. You're letting them know, like, hey, this is the deal. And I think it's very, very valid, because that's kind of like that final check mark that says, okay, everybody's bought into the process. Mama's going to be happy because she heard it from the boss man that this is how we do business. And it may show up and it may not. You may be able to spend those holidays with each other, but you might not.
it's
So
getting better. It's funny because that's one of the things that culture wise in general, like plants and stuff, they're far less demanding of that Christmas day today than they used to be. And I won't say that we're best at pushing back, but we do. I mean, we try to hold those things sacred because we understand there are traditions
absolutely.
and there are, but at the end of the day, if that's when we can do our work, that's when we do it. But the other thing I was going to say about that is that it gives me the opportunity to speak directly with the spouse, whether they're a husband or a wife, and lets them know I do care about your family. I care about your family life. It may not seem like it in the moment because
Right.
I'm demanding that he gets out of bed or she gets out of bed and does this thing, but I'm willing to come around full circle in the weeks that follow and give y'all some space and time to develop your own traditions and do things. And guys in particular are really bad about conveying. Like I could have that conversation in an interview, and if he really wants the job, he's not going to tell his wife that.
Right.
Um, and so I've just found it. We started that like 10 years ago or more, and it's just been a real benefit. I feel like to both our employees and the company. And so that's how you get through the wickets. So you get through that wicket, and the next day you should get an offer letter or not. Yeah.
Right. Depending on how that situation worked out.
Yep.
Now, so post offer. So we're sitting there. The technician shows up. We'll call him a NETA 2 just for the sake of. So NETA 2 qualified, kind of. Yeah, we'll call it day one here. What does a day look like? A day look like in the life of a technician at AMP? Where are they going to travel? What do they typically work on? What training do you guys do to kind of keep them spun up? I'm assuming y'all do some collective training and things like that. I believe it's even a requirement, if I'm not mistaken, for the
Yeah.
NETA Bubs. So what does that look like?
So to start with day one, and this is not your question, but I'm going to answer it. Um, they're going to spend a lot of time in training that first week. Um, we have deep safety training, like the kind of OSHA general stuff. The first week, they're going to do their OSHA 10 and get all that behind them because so many of our customers require that. And then there's
Right.
badging, like each plant specific has little videos you've got to watch to get your badge for them. And so we try to get everybody up and spooled up and ready and available that first week for those things. Um, so that's what you didn't ask, I don't think, but there's a lot of training that first week of safety and plant specific stuff. Then a normal day in the work, a level 2 is going to meet up probably with a senior guy, and they're going to go to work. We have a very diverse portfolio of clients, and so it could be a chemical plant. Um, it could be manufacturing, automotive. We service a rocket plant where they build rockets. We serve, so we serve municipalities. It could be in a substation, water treatment plants. Data centers are a big deal.
Huge right now.
Those typically, when you get to those, you're going to be going to the same place almost every day, and you get in a rhythm there. It's a lot of repetitive work because if they have one of something, they have 30 to
Right.
100.
Mainly on the commissioning side. Is that typically
Yeah,
where you're
that's on
seeing
the
most of that
acceptance
stuff?
testing and commissioning. Um, but so your day would be team up with somebody and go, and you're going to test a transformer or test breakers, and we try to have all the gear set up. We've got a tool list that we tell people, hey, if it's under an inch, you guys buy it. If it's above an inch, we've got you covered if you need that. But basically, we're requiring guys to have their own probably
Basic tool
250,
set.
$300 worth of tools. You could start the first day, first couple of weeks with nothing, and we'll kind of cultivate that. But we tell them by 90 days, we've probably written you enough checks by that time that you should have $300 worth of tools.
Right.
And so we've got all that documented out in the process. It looks, you're issued your PPE, you're issued some kind of more casual stuff, and then obviously FR and hats and all that stuff. So we try to represent our brand well, and PPE. I don't know. This is probably like a saying, hey, kudos on us. Well, we're buying them new Klein hard hats. We're not with a light, rechargeable light, and all that stuff. There are little things like that we try to go ahead and do for our guys. If you got a specific kind of safety glasses you like, then believe it or not, we're going to cater to you. We're going to say, okay, we'll go on Amazon and order them or whatever, or get you a pair. If you'll wear them, that's what's important, right? So we're not, yes, we have a box of 20 back there, and they're probably the middle of the road, but if you've got something you want, go for it. We'll take care of it.
Well, and I went to your website and I noticed y'all drive some sweet rigs. Is that pretty much the standard for what your folks drive out in the field?
So if you're a level 3 technician, you get a truck, and our trucks are all at least Lariat level, leather seats, heated, cooled seats.
Nice.
We've got some with, they all have 8 to 12 inch displays on the dash, and the guys have free use of those trucks for personal or whatever.
That's awesome.
A lot of our level 3, 4 techs they own another vehicle, but it's the one their wife drives.
Right.
Or it's something really sporty or something. I don't know how they do that,
Well, them Lariats are nice as heck. I can't, there ain't no doubt. I might need to go get my NETA cert and come work for Ampus, but it sounded like I could use a new pickup truck.
So we keep, I don't know, we're growing. And so that thought process probably gets challenged at least once or twice a year of how much are you spending in vehicles. But what I've found is that, hey, you got to run 100 miles down the road, you got to run, to go to a job site. Having a nice, comfortable vehicle makes all the difference in the world. And I hate vans. Oh my goodness. Don't get me, that is not what you asked me, but that's, that rattle and shaking, and you can't put enough foam in the back of a van to keep it from being like a daggum baby.
Just an echo chamber of clinging, probably.
It's awful. Yes.
Well, and I think it's very, very cool, man, that from the truck perspective, the way I look at it, and this may sound kind of rudimentary, but I'll go out and spend $3,000 on a nice ass bed, because I'm going to spend half of my life in that damn thing. So the same logic applies with trucks, right? If you got to drive from site to site and all that, why not take care of them? Understanding that that's one of those things that could impact your overhead cost a little bit. But I mean, ultimately, if your folks are happy and productive, is it worth it? I mean, some would say no, but I'm going to go with yes on this one.
We've got pretty good employee retention rate. So all you big companies, you're worried about employee retention, you're worried about them coming to work for AMP, you might want to look at that. Get out of the base model pickup trucks. And the other side, like we buy F-350s primarily. I guess we would use a different brand, but that's what we mostly have, because you put a primary injection test set which weighs 1,600 pounds in a trailer and a toolbox. It's safety reasons. I see other testing companies show up and they'll be pulling 7,000-8,000 pounds all day long with an F-150, which it probably is rated for it. But do you really want to drive at the edge of the ratings like 90% of the time? No. And so brakes last longer, the tires hopefully last longer. I don't know. That's my excuse anyways. We use diesels, and so they're, that lasts longer. But they have plenty of power. You don't have to worry about And then they don't break down as often. We put a lot of miles on these trucks because we're running all over the place,
Absolutely.
so just like you said, if you're going to spend a lot of time in it, it's like our mobile office.
Absolutely.
You're going to sit there and make phone calls, and if it's uncomfortable or if it's loud or if it's whatever, it plays into what kind of mood you're going to come home to your family in, right?
Right, exactly. Environment has a lot to do. I mean, with your feel, your I guess your feelings, your attitude, and all that other good stuff. If you're working in somewhere that you're comfortable and you have your needs met, it's not a miserable experience. I would think that that's going to benefit you. Just
We've got a
overall.
portable air conditioning unit, and all of our primary injection trailers have air conditioners on top. Because I mean, there's sometimes you just got to work outside.
Right.
But when we don't have to be in the elements, then why
You
would you?
know, exactly. Well, and then so we've kind of talked through technicians and stuff, and I appreciate you kind of walking through. I left it answered all the questions I had from that. I want to kind of look at the veteran piece of this. So as you know, like Southern Staffing, we're big. I'm 23-year ex-Navy, and it's funny, and not to make it kind of about us, but coming full circle, we started off not wanting to serve the military, not for a disdain of the military, but just for the sake of trying to cut ourselves in a new environment, new industry, new folks. And then we inevitably came back looping around to primarily helping or trying to service veterans. You mentioned 12 Ps earlier. Have you hired any other veterans from other specialties, and like nuclear bubbas or gas turbine electricians or electricians mates? Or like we already talked, you definitely hired prime power. And do you believe that those veterans that you have brought on, do they bring any ideal workforce or workforce traits to bear, if you will?
Oh, sure. Yeah. The Just the systematic processes of the military lend itself well to business acclimation. There's some um, that's bigger words than I'm used to using.
Same
Anyhow,
here.
the so we've got a few. We've had a couple of guys that were in military that weren't even in power at all. Like I said, we develop a lot of our technicians. So the call center guy was
Right.
prior military service. Um, and so, I don't have a lot of depth with like the nukes or gas turbine guys. I'm sure that the meticulousness, that's a lot of what we do. You kind of have to, you were talking about being self starters or being self motivated. That's really important, because a lot of times you're going to be out there and there's not going to be somebody kind of cracking a whip on you. You've got to do it. You got to make sure it gets done. You got to do it with a high level of quality. And so I think the meticulousness of some of those MOSs or whatever you want to call them would probably lend itself well to this. The rigidity of the military, like we're very relaxed and casual personality wise with one another. But when it comes to our work, you really, with safety, you have to do things the right way. And you've already got a long history of that if you've been in the military. Somebody's been telling you this is how we're going to do it. Um, and we like people to question our processes. We feel like
Sweet.
that's how they grow. And I think in a healthy environment in the military, you get a little bit of that too. But in some environments in the military, you might just do it. Um,
It's dependent.
but that just do it part really puts into you like this kind of mode of, hey, I need to succeed. And at the end of the day, any business owner, they're looking for somebody that wants to succeed themselves. I mean, if you don't want to succeed, how in the world are you going to make me succeed?
Right.
I It's my job to say I'm going to take what you're thinking is success and help tailor that and make sure that my success is wrapped up in it. Um, that's my job, but you've got to bring to the table that you want to succeed. if you don't want to succeed, I've got nothing to work with. Neither one of us
Right.
are going down that road.
Well, it aligns back to that culture thing, and making sure that it's the right fit for us, and or AMP in this particular instance. So that totally
Sure.
resonates, and we can definitely. I want to have an offline conversation with you at some point as well with regards to the nukes, because I do believe what we see is so the 12Ps just by proxy. Army prime power, they're dealing with substations, relay testing, distribution systems, AC/DC theory, but you also have a lot of that stuff that would be applicable as well from like a shipboard perspective with GSEs,
Mm-hmm.
GSMs, because they're running all of our power generations done by gas turbine there, and we still have switch gear and bus ties and distribution channels and bringing generators online and making sure everything's balanced and so you don't blow the back end out of something from a mismatch on frequency or whatever it may be. So but there's some other folks like that we can definitely shoot the breeze about, and hell, I might make another series on that at some point. I need to get some damn nukes involved anyway, so that's what we'll do at some point. But I'd love to chat with you about that. And we're almost at an hour and a half, my friend. So we'll get this thing wrapped up. How can people find out more about AMP, and where can they find you?
So I hang out on LinkedIn. I'm like a loser. That's like my arcade or whatever. If you want to find me, you can hit me up there pretty easily. I'm there, sadly, probably more than once a day. Uh,
Dude,
um,
it's okay.
Obviously, our website tells a lot about us, what we do, um, and we're always glad to have somebody stop by the office. So give me a call. I'd love to show you what we do. We've got in-house to AMP, so we do calibrations and glove testing, hot sticks, and stuff like that. So we've always got something going on in the
Sweet.
office, and the glove tester is always a fun thing to see. The rubber insulated gloves being dipped in a big vat and putting
That's cool.
70,000 volts through them and checking to make sure that they're still up to par. I enjoy it, anyways. Maybe nobody else has that kind of.
We nerd out on stuff like that. It's
Yeah,
okay.
that's me nerding out right there. I'll just walk through and I'm like, oh man, cool. And occasionally, you see this little lightning strike or whatever, little miniature strike that we're creating with 70,000 volts. Anyhow, so that's us. Well, like I said, we're always glad to show somebody around. I I say this with all sincerity that I am a complete open book. If you want to know something about the industry, if you want to ask personal questions, cosign on a house is about my limit of where I draw the
I feel
line.
you. I feel you.
But up to that, I mean, I tell people all the time, just hit me up. I've been a technician, and I didn't know what I was doing when I got started. I'm an entrepreneur. I've started 2 or 3 businesses. Certainly didn't know what I was doing. Still probably don't know what I'm doing. Learning something new every day, and I'm always happy to share whatever it is I'm learning right now. And then, business owner, scaling a business. We're taking something from what's been small and trying to figure out how to maintain that culture and grow it. Um, that's our big challenge right now, and I've been in the throes of that. And with that comes things like commercial real estate and just stuff that you're like, that's not really who I am, but I'm having to learn a lot of it to just cope in that world. So anyhow, just throw that out there. I'm always open to conversations. I love talking to people, especially if you want to grow and wanting to do something bigger and better with yourself. If I can help in any way, I'm happy to.
And likewise, I love the fact that you are charitable with your time and just really appreciate your outlook. That, like I said, this isn't to blow up your head, and I think that's probably how we came to have this conversation was the cultural alignment and kind of the way with which we see the world and trying to give back and help folks just do better by not having to suffer through the same stupidity that we've probably had more of in our lives. So that's really it. If I can just save a little bit of pain for someone on the backside, then
That's
mission
exactly right.
accomplished. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? But Brian, I truly do, man. Thank you so much for your time today and coming on and sharing. This was, I think, a unique value proposition for folks who perhaps think, that we all live in our little glass tower on the, glass tower in the castle. And I think it offers a human side to the C-suite, if you will. And so greatly appreciate you sharing your time today. And I will go ahead, just for everybody else's knowledge, this will get chopped up into little small segments and shared throughout the course of a couple weeks. And I'll make sure that we have a reference to, or the link to your website, and we'll make sure we tag you in the video so folks know where to come find you. But again, my friend, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule. I know you got 1,000 fish to fry, and giving me an hour and a half of your time was definitely more kind than you needed to be. So thank you, my friend.
It's been a great day. I've enjoyed it. It's been a great conversation. We've had a lot of fun.
Absolutely. And if I can ever be of assistance like you, for everybody, please reach out and let us know. And until next time, we'll talk to y'all soon. Y'all have a good one.